Okay, let's talk about reactivity and how to work with it directly. I've made other videos about this. If you want to see other descriptions of this process or other approaches, check out the playlist called Equanimity. Also, I have a playlist called Fetter 4 and 5, which talks about this pretty specifically. And check out the series on the fetters with Kevin Shanalek if you're interested as well. As far as reactivity in the way we're going to work with it today, I want to say a few overarching things about this process that will help, if you keep these sort of in mind, will help to keep the process on track. So one thing I'll say, which I've said before, but you probably already know what I'm going to say, but it's important. It bears repeating because we are wired, our body, minds, our nervous systems are wired to avoid pain and to seek pleasure. In addition to that, we often either overtly or subliminally get communicated this idea that spirituality, spiritual work, awakening, meditation, mindfulness is supposed to be peaceful and pleasant all the time. So the first principle I want to lay out is that this work is uncomfortable. I say this a lot when I talk about shadow work and I talk about dark nights and so forth, that parts of the process of awakening can be very uncomfortable. But specifically when we talk about reactivity, it's almost invariably uncomfortable. So just be aware that you're going to feel potentially some intense emotions, but you may just feel this really fundamental sense of like ickiness or like wanting to crawl out of your skin or restlessness. It's very common when doing this work. So you might ask, well, why would I do this? Well, the reason you feel that is because this process leads you into your kind of hidden storehouse of that discomfort. And by getting directly into it, you can really unhook some fundamental beliefs that are causing you to suffer. Also, by finding your way back into it, you acclimatize to the discomfort and the restlessness, which is a space in which you can do a lot of really profound and precise work around perceptual filters. So it pays huge dividends to do this work, but just know it typically is uncomfortable, especially when you first start it. So that's the first principle. The second principle is that you can access and unhook some pretty far-reaching and pervasive resistance patterns and reactivity patterns through one singular point of reactivity. What I mean by this is sometimes we get a little, daunted by this process because there are so many things we react to, right? We might think, well, sure, this one moment in time where I reacted, that was one reaction, but I do that multiple times a day. I do it in a lot of different situations. I feel like I'm reacting to everything all the time, or I just feel reactive. So we can kind of talk ourselves out of this because it just seems like too much work, or like we'll never be able to address all of the points of reactivity. But the nice thing about this is that when you really drill down into the mechanism of reactivity in a deliberate and sort of one-pointed way with this process, you actually are able to unhook a lot of reactivity with that singular, precise dive into the mechanism. So what that looks like is often you'll do this work and then something will shift or click, something will drop, and then you notice ongoing for days to weeks that something feels different, that you're not reacting to the normal things you would react to. Like you're not suppressing it, you're not trying to stop yourself from reacting, you just don't feel inclined to react. And the reason I say days to weeks is because over time you get used to it. Over time you realize it's the new normal. So it's not a temporary shift or temporary change, but you do get used to it, and it just sort of incorporates into your experience. But at first it can seem pretty remarkable that you're not reacting, that you're not feeling this big uprising of resistance in regard to a certain situation or person or whatever. So it works in this way that you can track it down through one specific point of reactivity and that will often have a somewhat of a global effect. So then, okay, well, what do we do now, right? How do we find that point of reactivity? Well, again, this is a relatively simple process, and it's not rocket science to figure out what you're reacting to. Just notice what you're reacting to. Yeah. Spend a day just paying attention to how you feel. Now, you may react to something, even if you're not having an outward or overt reaction. For instance, somebody may say something to you and you don't say something, I don't know, reactive back. You don't say something nasty back to them, or you don't visibly demonstrate your anger or something, but inside you feel a very strong reaction, right? You may be justifying your behavior in your mind. You may be arguing with that person in your mind. You may feel like this very intense emotion and excuse yourself from a situation so you can go indulge in a habit that you use to soothe yourself, right? You go right to a coping mechanism. That's a reaction. All of that is reaction. So just know that the reaction you find is one that you viscerally feel. It doesn't have to have played out externally necessarily. If it did, then that's usually pretty good evidence for a reaction as well. But that's the kind of thing you're looking for. So just watch how things go throughout the day, or maybe 2 or 3 days. But unless you've really broken the spell of reactivity, give yourself a week and you'll definitely react to something sooner or later. Yeah. Find whatever it is that you've felt a strong tendency to react to or have overtly reacted to. And that's a gold mine. Like, really trust the process. And to the degree you can, try to feel some gratitude for actually finding a point of reaction, because once you have that entry point, you're in really good shape, because now you can actually address it. You can use that entry point to get down to the mechanism of reactivity and find out what it is, or find out whether there is a mechanism that's forcing a reaction. And that search in and of itself pays dividends that you can't anticipate, actually. So we'll use an example. And this can be, I should also say, as a kind of guiding principle, this can be something very mundane. It doesn't have to be a certain childhood trauma. It doesn't have to be the one thing that endlessly makes you mad in the world, like some political thing, or it doesn't have to be something that's super intense and pervasive in your life. It could just be driving, right? Or standing in line at the grocery store and the person in front of you breaks out, 15 coupons, and you just feel like frustrated, impatient. You feel it in your body. Your body starts moving in an impatient way. You find yourself like angry at that person for being selfish, right? You're like having a conversation with them in your mind. It could be anything, but that's an example that someone pulls out some coupons and slows down the process when you're trying to check out, or you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off, let's say, or flips you off for whatever reason, and you don't even know what you did wrong, right? But you feel a reaction. So that's the entry point, is that reaction. And you don't always have to do this work in the moment. And in fact, often in the moment, you don't really have access to it. So what I would suggest is, as soon as you have a chance, if you're driving, maybe when you get home, sit down for 15 minutes and try to work on this, or even longer if you have time. Or just think back on your day and, put yourself in a location where you're not going to be distracted. There's not too much going on, but you can think back and go, okay, yeah, when my boss said that I had made a mistake that I know I didn't make, or something like that, I felt really triggered. I even kind of raised my voice at my boss or something. You find that situation, you find that moment in time, and then just feel into it. Kind of imagine it, like imagine reliving it visually or just in an auditory way, depending on how you remember and imagine things. And see if you don't feel the reaction. It may not be as intense as it was the first time, and that's okay. But see if your body is reacting. See if there's a strong tendency to want to, go to the coping mechanism, whether it's justification or arguing or distraction or dissociation. If that tendency is there, then you're good. You have access. And so the next part is really say you relive this, right? You imagine the process and don't go beyond what the trigger was. So what I mean by that is, if you imagine your boss telling you, oh, you made a mistake and you made an error in this project, we had to fix it, right? Don't go anywhere beyond that. Don't go into the next step, which is often you remembering, oh, no, I actually didn't make that mistake. That was so-and-so, and, justifying it and rationalizing or wanting to argue back or whatever it is. Try not to take that next step. Try to actually just feel what it feels like to be accused of making a mistake, right? Just feel it for a moment. And if you feel something really uncomfortable there, that's another piece of evidence that this is a good point of reactivity. Yeah. So now what you want to do is, once you see, okay, I'm definitely reacting to this moment in time. What I want you to do is look at the situation and ask yourself what it is that you expected to happen that didn't happen. For instance, and this is where I think a lot of people get hung up, because it's kind of tricky to do this, because we want to go into what that person did to me, right? Which feels more like blame. And what we don't want to do is go into what I thought should happen, and then my expectations were not met, because then it's kind of like putting the blame back on ourselves, right? We're seeing that we are actually responsible for the reaction. And this is just part of the process. So for instance, you could say, well, yeah, but my boss is the one that made the mistake. My boss told me I made an error in this project that I didn't make. So that's not a negative statement. It's a positive statement, right? The boss did this rather than the boss didn't do this. But if you just stand back for a moment and look at it and ask yourself, well, if you're upset because the boss told you made a mistake, what could you say you were expecting from the boss that didn't come? And it might be something like, well, I expected the boss to actually praise me for this project, or I expected the boss to fairly evaluate my work, which he or she didn't, because they overlooked the fact that someone else made a mistake, right? So it's something like that. It'll be like, and sometimes when you key into this, you'll realize that this has happened other times with the same person or situation, and you'll feel that, right? So if you say to yourself, I wanted my boss to notice that I put a lot of effort into getting things right, and they didn't. That's the statement we're looking for. And if it feels uncomfortable to say that, and it feels like you want to go to the next step by saying, well, what they did to me was this, and what they should have done was this, and on and on, realize that that's part of the reaction. That's the formation of the reaction. Rather, just stay with the statement and that the kind of memory and feeling of it, but the statement in the sense that I wanted my boss to acknowledge my hard work, or I wanted my boss to recognize my attention to details, and they didn't. A simpler way of saying it is, my boss didn't recognize that I did the project right. My boss didn't appreciate my work. Okay, but it's a statement of what didn't happen. Once you're able to formulate that statement, you've really done all of the preliminary steps. The rest of this is mostly feel and a bit of inquiry, I suppose. But once you've made the statement that this didn't happen, whatever it was, right? This person didn't do X, Y, Z. There's no more analysis of the event that you need to do. You can just feel into that. What does it feel like when you intone that to yourself? My boss didn't recognize that I had done the project correctly. How does it feel? And you can kind of scan the body and see, oh yeah, I feel a lot of tightness in my chest. Like I feel like, I just want to do something about it. I want to react. I want to criticize my boss. I want to quit my job or whatever, right? You can feel that, but just step back into it. Don't go forward into what you want to do, right? The action you want to take, and don't go into the reaction of trying to recreate reality in a way that it doesn't exist, meaning like trying to imagine what should have happened. That's just a reaction. Just step back into that discomfort, right? That sensation. And again, if you need to find where it is in the body to remind yourself and anchor yourself to it, then do that. It may just feel like a tight sensation in the chest, or a squirmy sensation in the hands and feet, or it can be anything. But find your way into that experience, that sensation, and just stay there. Just stay with that. And we could call that the reaction gap. And that means the gap between my expectation not being met and whatever it is I think I need to do about it. Whether it's justify, think, argue, distract, run away, right? Some mild version of fight or flight, or freeze or whatever, right? What is it that you're trying to do to remedy the fact that your expectations weren't met? That's the reaction. So we're trying to stay in the gap just before the reaction, which will feel like a kind of raw discomfort. And you just stay there. And this is work. You're doing work by doing this. The first time you do this, if you're able to precisely define that statement of what expectation wasn't met, that's good enough. Just to define that is sometimes very challenging. You'll feel sometimes it gets very slippery with the mind because it's so easy to jump past the gap and be in the reaction without realizing it. So it can be tricky just to get to that statement and realize what actually occurred, that you had an expectation that just wasn't met. So, pat yourself on the back if you can even do that. And beyond that, if you're able to stay in the gap, stay in the discomfort, not move to any form of reaction for a period of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, pat yourself on the back. That's good enough. Even the first couple times you do this, that's as far as you may be able to get, and that's fine. Then the third thing to do is look around in the experience. Anywhere in your experience you can find something tangible that's saying, I have to react to this. I have to go to the next step. I have to run away. I have to eat something. I have to justify myself. I have to call my boss, right? Look around and see, is there something that's making that happen, that's compelling you to take that action, that's saying, if X happens, then Y has to happen. If I feel uncomfortable and my expectation wasn't met, I have to do the next thing. You're trying to look for what is making that connection or what's bridging the gap, the reaction gap, if anything. Is there something actually bridging that gap into reaction? Look for it. Feel into it. If it seems too abstract to look for it, then just feel, is there anything that's literally linking the impetus to react, the sensations, the unmet expectations? Is there anything that literally links that to the next thing that has to happen or that I believe has to happen? Really, really feel into this. It may feel, again, kind of opaque, hard to really see what you're trying to do here, but you will notice that a reaction seems to happen. Why? Right? In the past, you've reacted. Right now, do you have to? Is there something making it happen? Is there something causally linking those two together? That's what you're doing. That's the third step, and that's it. Keep looking. And you may or may not feel something suddenly change, shift, drop. That's all you're doing. And you may feel the tension build, almost like if you ever hear somebody who has tics, they'll say the reason you tick is because the tension builds until you do, kind of thing. It may feel something like that, where you feel this tension building or something, right? But even if that's happening, notice what the mind is saying about it, right? What are the thoughts what are they telling you? Oh, I have to react. I have to do something. I have to justify. Those are thoughts. Those aren't actually real, right? Those aren't actually a mechanistic link. Look for the mechanistic link. Is there one that says, my expectation wasn't met? I feel this discomfort. It's an uncomfortable sensation. You don't have to try to make it other than uncomfortable. If it's uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable. Does that equate to, and then I have to do the next thing? The more you ask yourself this, the more you sit in the gap, the more you feel this, the more you'll start to really pick up that there actually isn't. There's no reason. There's no real reason. And even then, don't stop there. Keep going until something changes, because the more it really is driven home in the body that there's no reason to react, the more the body will actually stop trying to react. And then, only then will you see there was absolutely no reason to react. Doesn't do any good at all, except makes you upset. Makes you upset, and if you react externally in the wrong way, it can have serious implications as far as your work or relationships or whatever. But most importantly, it's just causing you to suffer. But you can't sidestep the work, really. You have to really go down and feel this deeply, and repeatedly until it's clear. That's how we do reactivity work. Let me know if that's unclear to you, or if there's anything that I missed or you want clarification for.